both dead or alive by Samar Guha, Member of Parliament. Chapter 3 Findings Without Foundation. The second inquiry into the Netaji mystery roused tremendous interest and expectations in the country. The commission constituted for the purpose was a judicial body which the people believed would conduct inquiry without any kind of fear or favor from the government. It was further hoped that all efforts will be made to find all facts surrounding the circumstantial mysteries of Netaji's disappearance, and the commission's findings will be objectively based on them. For this, it was desirable that the chairman of the Netaji Inquiry Commission will conduct himself scrupulously free from any kind of government influence or pressure. But regrettably, Mr. Khosla, the chairman of the one-man commission, behaved as if he was obliged to act more as an executive officer of the administration than an independent judge. He seemed so anxious to please the then Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi that the work of the inquiry finally turned into a veritable mockery. Can it be thought of that the chairman of an independent judicial commission will undertake an official assignment to write a biography of the Prime Minister while presiding over the proceedings of a judicial commission? Mr. Khosla committed such an unbelievable folly by agreeing to write a biography of Mrs. Gandhi and receive a substantial royalty for it, and even published it before he completed the assigned work of the commission. Pandit Nehru did not permit Shah Nawaz committee to visit Taipei, the place of occurrence of the alleged air crash. After 6 months hard struggle in parliament, Mrs. Gandhi was made to agree to allow Khosla Commission to visit Taiwan and conduct inquiry there. The commission visited Taipei, but Mr. Khosla most obligingly carried a secret directive with him from Delhi not to enter into any kind of communication with either the government of Taiwan or non-official agency there. Shri H.V. Kamath, Malika Govind Reddy, late Prakash Veer Shastri, and some other prominent members of parliament who visited Taiwan earlier told the commission that the Taiwan government conducted an inquiry to ascertain whether any plane really crashed at Taipei airfield in August 1945, and they found that no such incident occurred there at the specified date. But while at Taipei, Mr. Khosla officially refused to seek any report from the government of Taiwan, and the Taiwan authorities also declined to hand over their findings to Khosla Commission on their own. Mr. Khosla did something more unbelievable at Taipei. He bought a present for the Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi at Taipei, which he personally handed over to her on returning home. Could any other ex-judge or chairman of a judicial commission think of behaving in a similar manner? No. This gentleman did something more ugly. He took 4 years to complete the work of the commission, and before his report was placed on the table of parliament, it was found that a Delhi publisher had already published a book named Last Days of Netaji by Mr. Khosla, which was verily a verbatim reproduction of the report of the commission which he submitted to the government. It means Mr. Khosla betrayed the secret of the report to his publisher, and much before it was discussed by parliament. Chairmanship of the Netaji Commission was the 13th assignment of its kind for Mr. Khosla after his retirement from the office of the Chief Justice of the Punjab High Court, and all throughout thereafter he enjoyed the same benefits from the government as he had when he was in regular judicial service. What the commission was expected to do. The National Committee on Netaji emphasized from the very beginning that judicial findings of the commission from any inquiry after 27 years primarily dependent on the availability of the documents like first reports of investigation made by British Mountbatten headquarters and MacArthur headquarters, British counter-intelligence organization known as CSTIC, and the probe conducted by the government of Wavell. Second, Mountbatten's full diary. Third, wartime Japanese records connected with the reported incident of the air crash at Taihoku and the story of Netaji's death. Third, USA's records. Fourth, Russia's records. Sixth, Nehru's secret files connected with all information regarding the report of Netaji's death. Seventh, report of Taiwan government's investigation about the alleged air crash at Taipei Taihoku. Eighth, Habibur Rahman's statements and a report of his interrogations by different investigating agencies, etc. etc. The National Committee submitted a long list of documents asking the Commission to make every effort to make them available for necessary examination by the Commission. Mr. Khosla made little attempt to bring pressure on the government to secure relevant documents from the foreign sources. The government further informed Mr. Khosla that more than 30 personal files of Nehru connected with the story of Netaji's disappearance were either destroyed or missing. Mr. Mohammad Yunus, who was special secretary to Nehru, used to deal with them, but he was not asked by Khosla to appear before the commission to explain the most intriguing official communication of missing or destroyed of so many vital files connected with the information about Netaji. Some other files which were produced by the government almost at the last stage of the proceedings of the commission deprived the council of the National Committee to pursue many matters found in them for further investigation. Khosla Commission mainly received only those documents which were placed before Shahnawaz Committee. Findings by Khosla Commission. Exactly 4 years after the formation of the commission, Mr. Khosla submitted his report on to the government, which contained the following findings. First, Bose was informed on August 12, 1945 that war was about to conclude and the Japanese had decided to surrender to the Allied forces. He was at that time at Sarambam. The message was brought to him there by Nigeshi, witness number 50. Second, Bose at once left for Singapore, where he discussed his future plans with his colleagues and the ministers of his cabinet almost day and night. Final decision was taken on 14th when Sakai arrived and conferred with Bose. It was decided that Bose himself should leave Singapore and try to escape to Russia, where he hoped to find asylum. Third, on the morning of August 16, 1945, Bose left Singapore accompanied by Colonel Habibur Rahman, S.A. Iyer, a Japanese liaison officer, Nigeshi, witness number 155, and others. The party arrived at Bangkok at 3:30 p.m. and spent the night there. Fourth, at about 8 a.m. on August 17, 1945, Bose and the party left by 2 planes for Saigon. Bose's party included Colonel Habibur Rahman, Debnath Das, S.A. Iyer, Hashia Isoda, Gulzara Singh, Colonel Pritam Singh, Abid Hussain, and others. The party arrived at Saigon at 11 a.m. Fifth, the planes in which Bose and his party had travelled to Saigon had to go back and fresh arrangements had to be made for the next stage of the journey. Bose was informed that one seat could be given to him in a Japanese bomber which had come from Manila and was going to Daren in Manchuria. The plane, Bose was informed, had on board a number of Japanese army officers who had been posted to Manchuria and who could not be left behind. Sixth, Bose was very upset on hearing this because he wanted to carry all the members of his party with him. Isoda and Hachis were sent to Dalat, where Field Marshal Tiraji was camping. These two emissaries could not see Tiraji personally, but his adjutant told them that it might be possible to make available 2 or 3 seats in all for Bose. Seventh, Isoda and Hachia returned to Saigon and conferred with the pilot of the plane and the Japanese military authorities there. The conclusion was that 2 seats were placed at the disposal of Bose. Eighth, after some discussion, Bose decided to avail himself of the 2 seats and asked Habibur Rahman to accompany him. Ninth, the Japanese bomber left Saigon at approximately 5 p.m. carrying Bose, Habibur Rahman, Lieutenant Colonel Sakai S. Nagasaki, Tara Kuno, navigator Tarakchi, the pilot in charge Takizawa, General Shidei, second pilot Ayogai, and some others whose names need not be mentioned. They were the crew and other officers posted at Manchuria or to Tokyo. The last 3 were killed in the alleged air crash. In 10th, the plane arrived at Turin at 7:45 p.m. and the party spent the night there. 11th, on the morning of August 18, 1945, the bomber left the Turin carrying the previous complement of crew and passengers and arrived at Taipei in Formosa at 2 p.m. 12th, the party had a snack lunch at Taipei while the pilot attended to a snag which he declared had been corrected after a short while. 13th, the plane took off at 2:35 p.m. but within a few seconds one of the engines flew out and the plane crashed near the fringe of the Taihoku airfield. The body of the plane broke into parts and caught fire. 14th, the pilot Takizawa and General Shidei were killed inside the plane. The rest of the crew and the passengers came out, but all of them had sustained burn injuries. 2 of them, Ayogi and Bose, had received very severe burns. 15th, injured persons were carried to the army hospital. a few kilometers from the airfield and given medical treatment. 16th, Bose had sustained burn injuries of the third degree, and despite the efforts of the doctors to revive him, he succumbed to his injuries the same night. 17th, of the other injured persons, Ayogi, the second pilot, also died. 18th, 2 days later, Bose's body was cremated and his ashes were carried to Tokyo in the beginning of September 1945, where they were deposited in the Rankoji temple. 19th, there is no reason for believing that the relations between Nehru and Bose were anything but friendly on a personal basis. Political differences between them did not lessen Bose's great respect for Nehru and Nehru's affection for the younger politician whose patriotism no one questioned. 20th, there is not the slightest evidence of any attempt by Nehru to suppress the truth about Bose at any stage or to make false statements about his death at Toyoko on August 18th, 1945. His concession to a public demand for inquiry was an instance of his compliance with democratic procedure and not an admission of his disbelief in the truth of the crash story. 21. The personnel of the committee appointed by Nehru's government to inquire into the Bose's disappearance is ample evidence of his bona fides. He appointed Bose's brother, who could be presumed to make an earnest search for truth about his brother and whose appointment would win public confidence. The chairman was Shahnawaz Khan, who was a close associate and confidant of Bose, who had taken a very prominent part in INA's campaign against the British. Shahnawaz Khan could therefore be depended upon to conduct the inquiry honestly and conscientiously. The third member was Shri S.N. Moitra, a member of the ICS and a Bengali. He was chosen because of his administrative experience, his proved integrity, and his attachment to Bose, who belonged to his own estate. 22. There is no evidence of any attempt by the present government to withhold evidence or place impediments in the way of this commission. All documents called for have been supplied, and the delay occasioned in making some files and documents available cannot be construed as placing obstacles in the progress of the inquiry. Such delays are a normal feature of government red tape and preoccupation with more urgent matters. 23rd, Bose had impressed the Japanese as a patriot and a competent administrator and could win the confidence of Indians in Southeast Asia. The Japanese, however, looked upon him not as an equal ally but as a person whom they could use for their own ends. It was with great reluctance that they allowed Bose to organize the Burma campaign against the British forces. The Japanese, however, did not give adequate assistance to the INA, and despite promises, they did not hand over the occupied territory to the provisional government of Azad Hind. An instance in point was the Nicobar and Andaman Islands, the administration of which was not completely entrusted to Major General Langanathan, who was sent as a High Commissioner by Bose to take charge of the islands. All the evidence points to the fact that the Japanese neither had complete confidence in Bose's ability to lead a large army and secure victories over the Allied forces, nor did they fully trust him. They nevertheless had considerable respect for him because they saw that he was a man of remarkable courage and unquestioned patriotism. 24th, the Japanese attitude towards Bose underwent a change when the war concluded. The Japanese were more concerned with trying to retire whatever they could of their own resources than with giving large-scale help to Bose, which would have proved detrimental to their own interest. Also, the blow to their self-esteem was so violent that they became indifferent to Bose and his future plans. 25th, the numerous stories about encounters with Bose at various times and various places after 1945 are completely false and unacceptable. They are the result either of hallucination helped by wishful thinking or have been invented by persons who wanted to draw attention to themselves and advertise themselves as a public spirit man, a chimera of judicial findings. How did Mr. Khosla arrive at his findings? Did he analyze the documents placed before the commission inadequate and maigre though they were? No, he ignored them mostly except those which lent support to his patently motivated findings. Did he examine the evidence of all witnesses? No, he made selective use of the evidence of only 5 Japanese witnesses, merits of which will be discussed later. In corroboration of his findings, Mr. Khosla altogether examined 224 witnesses, including 18 Japanese. His report consists of 123 printed pages, 77 pages of which he dealt with various evidence. Nearly 42 pages of the analysis of the evidence were devoted to Japanese witnesses, 35 pages to the evidence of Sholmari adherents, to which the Council of the National Committee, Shri Gobind Mukherjee, in course of his 25 days argument, paid no attention whatsoever. Only 7 pages were kept apart by Mr. Khosla for dealing with the evidence of 185 Indian witnesses, including that of a high-ranking INA officer, Azad Hind government ministers, and well-known associates of Netaji. The big volume of the evidentiary materials related to the vital facts and information produced before the commission by so many important Indian witnesses were almost totally ignored by Mr. Khosla. In some cases, only he casually referred to them, and to with many arrogant, insinuating, and vulgarly disrespectful remarks against many of the most trusted and respected colleagues of Netaji. Mr. Khosla did not hesitate to suppress and distort many evidentiary facts, even, and in many instances resorted to inconceivable trickery of judicial perjury. An instance of the kind is his reference to Siastek report, which will be taken up later. The present writer was made a special target for his disdainful criticism, deliberately based on malicious suppression or distortion of evidentiary facts. The commission was asked only to inquire into all facts and circumstances relating to the disappearance of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in 1945 and subsequent development therewith. However, even a casual perusal of Khosla's report and his findings will show how tendentially he violated the terms of reference of the commission. He defended Shah Nawaz Committee's report, although at the initial stage of the proceedings of the commission he described it as non-established. He extolled the role of Nehru vis Netaji and made every effort to justify Nehru's anti-fascist war policy as against the revolutionary war strategy of Netaji. Nay, Mr. Khosla transgressed all the judicial norms and values of patriotism in brazenly concluding that Netaji's war of liberation ended in a failure. Mr. Khosla exceeded all limits of depravity in describing Netaji as playing the role of a puppet or a pawn or a quilising of the Japanese. He mentioned that all evidence showed that Netaji's status was no better than he depicted him in his report. At least at 27 places in his report, Mr. Khosla, in most outrageously disappearing terms, tried to denigrate the revolutionary personality of Netaji. In about 5,500 pages of the proceedings of the commission, neither in any document nor in any evidence by any witness any such comment could be traced, even faintly. Nevertheless, this ex-judge of a high court made so many derogatory remarks and malicious observations about Netaji without any kind of evidentiary basis that the Indian nation will hardly pardon him for his dereliction, almost amounting to criminal propensity. What Khosla produced as the report of the commission can verily be described as an ugly specimen of a judicial chimeras. The subsequent chapters will show how he arrived at his findings without even any semblance of respect for the facts and documents that came before the commission as evidentiary materials.